a couple of other people that were important to Darwin, or Darwin's thoughts. One was the guy that came up with the first theory of evolution. This person, Lamarck, came up with this concept and he presented it to scientific community. Back then, people used to, the scientific community was small enough that people actually had meetings where all the scientists got into a room in a chamber and talked out different theories and ideas. And people either, accepted it and then sort of went with it, or you said, no, get out, right? So Lamarck went and he got basically laughed out of the chamber. But what his idea was that animals adapted to the environment, which actually was also part of Darwin's concept. But two things that he said that really have been a lot of things have been set out to disprove these two parts. All right. So one is that animals strive upwards. This was kind of in regards to the scala naturae that we were talking about. That is that worms, which were on the bottom rung of that scale of nature, wanted to be humans. In other words, they were really striving to be something other than they were, and that is why things progressed over time. And the second thing was that he said, that also was refuted, is that animals acquire their characteristics during their lifetime. In other words, things like giraffes' necks were long because their necks stretched for food, because food was scarce, and because their necks stretched, they would pass that on to their offspring. So both of these ideas were kind of addressed with Darwin's ideas of natural selection, sort of refuted, if you will, saying that animals don't really strive upwards, and that they are really, if they exist in nature, they are doing the best that they can, or at least well enough in their environment that they live on, and that animals don't acquire their characteristics. They either have them or they don't. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. And Lyell was another person. Lyell, he was also a geologist, and he took Hutton's idea of uniformitarianism and went with it and wrote several volumes of a treatise called Principles of Geology. And he was also Darwin's friend. They wrote letters back and forth. And at the time, people wrote big, long letters because letters took a long time to get someplace. So oftentimes people would work on a letter for weeks at a time and then, forward it on. So, and then once Darwin was on his ship, of course, that was even longer. So anyway, they conversed back and forth, and this idea of slow, gradual change of uniformitarianism was outlined in his Principles of Geology, using lots of backup in terms of what was the layers in the rocks and fossils that were found and that kind of thing, and lots of examples. And Malthus was another person. He was actually a social scientist, I believe. Maybe he was a mathematician. I can't remember. But anyway, his ideas were used by a lot of different people because what he said was that populations are rising much faster than food sources, or actually arable land, is what he said. And so he was saying that the amount of food that is present or possible is going up as land masses are being used. And of course, at that time, we weren't overusing land masses. But that the population was at some point going to not be supported by the food. And there would be a decline in populations, and that we needed to back off and sort of, use things more wisely, was really his point. We still use these kind of diagrams today to talk about population growth in nature and how there are caps to the environment that the environment puts on populations. And this kind of goes along with this idea of evolution, that not all individuals in a population can be supported for a long period of time. All right, and so we're going to talk about Darwin and his voyage. So Darwin went on his voyage in the Beagle, and that was in 1809 was when they set sail. The Beagle was commissioned to as a cartography, I believe, ship That is, they were map making, but also this is by Spain. They were also to set out to find gold. So anyway, they were going from Europe down the South America, around the tip of South America, which is pretty gnarly to get around there, and then up the other side, kind of cutting into the coast here and there just to see what they could see and to map, so to speak. And this, of course, on the other side of South America is where the Galapagos are, and you probably all know that the Galapagos is where the Galapagos tortoises are, or Darwin's tortoises, and where the theory of natural selection was sort of, come about, I guess, or envisioned, I suppose. And anyway, as he set sail and went up the coastline, as you can imagine, in the coastline, he was going from basically polar regions all the way up the coast to more tropical regions, and he was seeing differences in organisms as he went. So, for example, if he was looking at, there were like mountain sheep that existed all along the coast, and those animals, like in the south, were white, blending in with their environment. And then as he got further north, where it became either forest or high desert, what he was seeing was brown organisms. So he was kind of saying the organisms were changing with the environment, which was not new, because Lamarck said that. But he also, when he got to the Galapagos, he was noticing many things there. He actually did a lot of work on barnacles, which are not well known, and maybe some of you don't even know what those are, but those are a sea organism. But of course, what's really famous is Darwin's finches.